Thank you so much, Sri Pillai Prabhu, especially for that wonderful kirtan. I mean, that was like amazing. He's giving kirtans all over the world, so it's very great fortune of us to have him here now regularly and giving us that space. And I'm feeling a lot of surge of energy. Normally this is like my comfort zone to just kind of like come in here and share all these things, but I feel like it was such a nice, raising. So now I'm like, okay, now I really have to bring it out. So yeah, let's break the ice a little bit first, at least for my own sake. Today's topic is going to be where we belong and finding the community within. And maybe we can break the ice by taking about 5 or so people. Since we have so many, I don't think we're going to get through everybody. So let's take 5 people, your name, where you're from, and one thing that allows you to feel a sense of belonging. One thing that allows you to feel a sense of belonging. Okay. Anyone like to go first?
I'll go.
Avi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Avi. I grew up in India, very close to Mumbai. I've been living in New York area for almost 11 years at this point. One thing that gives me a sense of belonging is community, which I've found the last 1 year here and other places as well. And I think that brings so much joy for me on a daily basis, and I look forward to these community gatherings because it makes me happy.
Nice. Right on. Thank you, Avi. I will take a few more. Anyone have something to share?
Anuj. I'm Anuj. I'm from Long Island. I live in the city. Lived in the city for a long time now. And one thing that makes me feel belonging is humor. When I feel like there's laughter, and I feel that's a great way to just connect and feel like you're a part of something.
Nice. Then you and I are going to be good friends. Thank you, Anuj. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jess. I'm from California originally, but I live in New York now for the past 6 years. One thing that makes me feel sense of belonging is being surrounded by people who share my values. So communities that really align in terms of things that are important to me personally or things that I'm going through. Like I'm a founder, so founder communities, and I'm really passionate about sustainability. So
Nice.
finding communities in New York, which I think there's a lot, just being in spaces where others, like with others that share similar values.
Gotcha. Okay, nice. So what I'm hearing is similar values that kind of support that principle, that way that you want to live life and share and make the world a better place for other people to also flourish within that space. Nice. Thank you. Also, out of curiosity, where in California?
Santa Cruz.
Santa Cruz. Okay, I was in Sacramento. Yeah, nearby. Santa Cruz is a lot cooler though. Thank you. And maybe 1 or 2 more.
Hello, I'm Prahlad from Australia. For me, I would say it's shared values, shared interests as well. Something that we have in common with another person. Even when we talk, we find out Santa Cruz, Santa, wherever, and we're like, okay, we have a connection there.
Yeah.
And the other thing is positive regard, some kind of respect, feeling welcomed. So.
Right. Like when you walk into the door, and I guess some stores have this, like somebody who's greeting you, like, hello, I see you, I'm glad that you are here. So that kind of being received kind of makes us feel like, oh, this is nice, I can belong here. Nice. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Sahil.
Sahil.
I'm born and raised in New York, New Jersey. I lived in California for 2 years.
California crew.
Few California short-term visitors, and I've noticed. So I kind of grew up in an Indian household, went to NYU, so I've always been surrounded by a lot of people. Normally, I felt very fulfilled when I lived a lot with my mind. And I experienced, I'd say, deep loneliness the last 2 years. It took me a little bit to realize, but it was, so what I've learned is the belonging is when I connect with my heart and soul, it could be with silence. It could be where somebody really understands you on a deep level, and you understand them.
Yeah.
But if it's transactional or like mindset, like which a lot of life in New York sometimes is,
Yeah.
then I realize it's like not number of people, or like it's alone doesn't mean lonely.
That's good.
I'd say this year is very different in a positive way, and I'd say a place like this enhances connection. I mean, the topic of soul talks. So, thank you.
Excellent. Oh, you hit on so many points. It's almost like, yeah, finding the community within, kind of having that kind of peace within the self, and also the qualitative relationships that help support that. It's in that direction. Nice. Thank you for sharing that. So as we continue on, I find it helpful for myself to give some kind of definition. So, because there can be so many different connotations, denotations of the words that we use. So to give like a set thing to channel our energy for today, let's give a definition for how we mean the sense of belong. So according to Merriam-Webster, the particular usage of belong would be to be in a proper situation. And I thought that was a really interesting way to describe it, to be in a proper situation, right? Okay. So we're going to start with that. We can think of things that are an improper situation. A little thought exercise. According to this definition, where does a fish belong? Where does a fish belong? That was going to be too easy. Does it belong in the sky? Not so much. Does it belong in a volcano? I hope not. I hope volcanic piranhas don't exist, because that sounds terrifying. So, but we can see that fish naturally belong in water. Why? Simple thought, but why? Because they can breathe, they can float around, as you can see, with little fish friends. I don't know if fish have friends, but Finding Nemo has led me to believe so. I don't know if all that is accurate. But like this, we can understand that fish belong in water. Now, if we continue the thought exercise, we can ask ourselves, where do humans belong? Okay. So if a fish belongs in water, where does a human belong? According to the University of Pennsylvania and the Mind Core Research Center, they are quoted stating that humans are inherently social beings, and that their need for connection is as vital as food or shelter. So we also understand, okay, we're on land, we breathe air, we need food, we need shelter, but also what comes along with that is the, as it says, the vital aspect of social being, social connection. So like this, from that we can deduce that humans belong in community. Okay. That all sounds like a pretty logical reasoning. But now I'm going to challenge you. Do we really belong in just any community? Not exactly, right? Do we feel like we have a sense of belonging in communities where we don't feel accepted as who we are, where we feel maybe discriminated against or criticized? In those kind of communities, we don't feel that sense of belonging. So to go further, in conjunction with the researcher Brené Brown, there's this idea of belonging and fitting in. So she describes it as belonging means that we're valued because of who we are. Because of who we are. We feel accepted. Whoever we come at, however state, we feel accepted for that which we can bring into that space. They see us, and they love that. We feel respected, we feel appreciated. Whereas fitting in can often mean we're accepted only if we conform. Only if we conform. And there could be a gradient between these two. It can be really subtle, because we can think that sometimes a community can challenge us to be the better version of ourselves, which that we need. I'm thinking of like a flower that has yet to bloom. Due to its circumstance, through getting proper nourishment, it begins to blossom and become a fuller self, a fuller version of its true self. But if it doesn't get that nourishment, it never really gets to its full potential. And so we see when we enter into communities that challenge us in those ways for our betterment, then we become better people as a result. And I'm thinking to my personal experience, spending time in the Spiritual Education Center in Krishna House, Florida, being there for 2 years. I remember actually saying this, like quoting myself. After being there for some months, I just stated like, wow, it feels like for the first time I'm actually being myself. Because we're so normalized and so we're so habituated to living in a society which we may feel like we have to conform to certain things. We have to constantly act outside of our nature and interests for the satisfaction of others or for the validation of others. And for the first time, I felt like I was in a spiritual community that was just seeing me as a soul, that was seeing me as a living being and accepting me for that, giving me affection for that. And so that allowed those inner aspects of my heart to feel safe and to gradually blossom. And feeling that blossom, that surcharge of being myself became extremely exhilarating to the point where I was like, wow, this is actually who I am. This is actually who I am. But we can see on the other side that sometimes there's this mood of conforming. And we can see that in the greater society, and we can also see that even in spiritual circles. This idea that you're only good or you're only progressing or only worthwhile if you do exactly how we do, when we do, what we do. Right? It's different if something like that supports our life and we feel inspired to take that up. Spirituality really is a matter of being inspired to take these things up. But if we're forced to conform outside of our nature, for example, if we are a fish, if we're a fish and they're trying to make us fly, it's just too far out of our nature. It's actually something that we just are not, which is very different than someone challenging us to be the better version of ourselves. So we see the other, where are we? The other fish friends. Again, Finding Nemo reference, don't know if it's accurate, but the other fish friends can encourage each other, give them guidance, tell them not to swim out into the bay, touch the bottom of the boat, called the butt. Pretty sure that's not accurate, but still like this, in sense of community, they can challenge us to become the better versions of ourselves so that we can flourish. So the answer to that question, where do humans belong? Yes, they do belong in community, but not just any community, a loving community. One that sees us, that values us, that exchanges affectionate dealings with us. So, now we figured out that fish belong in water and humans belong in loving communities. Let's take that to a transcendental level. In the Bhagavad Gita, a world-renowned philosophical book, in the second chapter, text 13, it is said, Dehinosmin yatha dehe komaram yavana jara tatra deyantara praptir dhiras tatra namuyate. Now this basically translates as being that the soul, which is within the body, enters into this form, begins at the beginning of life, grows up, takes into adulthood, and then gradually into elder age. And at the end of that life, the soul transmigrates into a new form. Basically, the cycle of reincarnation like this. And so if we understand from this context and many, many other instances explained throughout the Bhagavad Gita, like Ajo Nityam Shashvato Yam Purano Nahanyate Hanyamane Sharire, that the soul is eternal, ever existing, primeval, has no beginning point, has no end date, that it is, that it doesn't die when the body dies. Big point. So if we understand from this perspective that the soul is inherently eternal, fully conscious, and fully blissful, that brings up a core question. Where does that soul belong? Because that soul is different than the fish, that soul is different than the human. Where does that soul belong? And so to understand this, we have to understand a little bit about the soul. In the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about two different energies, apara prakriti and para prakriti. So para prakriti is the spiritual energy, Sat Chit Ananda, eternal, fully conscious, and full of bliss. Now even modern science is gradually coming to this realization that in essence, energy cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed. It may be able to change form, but if energy cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed, then what does that mean? If it can't be created, that means it has no beginning date. If it can't be destroyed, it has no end date. What do you call something that has no beginning and no end? Eternal. Exactly. So we understand that energy is eternal and that consciousness is a unique aspect of reality, of which we are. In our previous class, Srila Prabhu gave a really excellent look into this cycle of reincarnation and so many instances and so many stories where people even can remember previous lifetimes. That's on our YouTube, so if you like, check that out, it's there. But from that, we can understand that there is also a spiritual environment. If we look at it, the opposite, Apara Prakriti is of the material elements, which are composed of earth, water, air, fire, ether, and even more subtle, mind, intelligence, and the sense of self, relative sense of self. Today I'm 27, next year I'm 28. Today it is, right now the sun is out, but later it won't be. The sun is out here, but it's not on a different part of the world. So this is relative truth, but it's not eternal truth. So thereby it's material, which is temporary, right? But if we see that the soul is eternal, it would also make sense that there is an environment that is also eternal, and that the eternal spark, the eternal soul, can go into that eternal spiritual environment. So deducing this from many ancient wisdom texts around the world, and in this case from the Bhagavad Gita, we can understand that the soul, being eternal, belongs in the eternal environment. Just like a fish belongs in water, humans belong in community, loving community. The soul, which is inherently eternal and spiritual, belongs in a spiritual environment. Right? Okay, now let's get a little bit deeper. So in the Bhagavad Gita, 8th chapter, text 16, it says, Abrahma bhuvana loka, punar avartano juna, mam upetya tukunteya punar janmana vidyate. That's because the soul is eternal. If we look this like on an equation, you have an eternal soul, Ananda Chinmaya Vyasa, that is by nature pleasure-seeking, and it's trying to seek that pleasure naturally in a temporary circumstance. That equation is incompatible. No matter how many scoops of ice cream I try to enjoy, at some point, I'm going to run out of ice cream, or I'm going to run out of stomach space, or something or the other. And so if I'm trying to find eternal happiness from something that's temporary, that's an incompatible situation. At some point, I'm going to be feeling a lacking, a feeling of without. And that's not natural for the soul. But if we find that eternal happiness, the eternal soul finds its happiness in an equally spiritual component, then that equation works. The eternal soul finding its eternal pleasure in an eternal aspect. And so here, Krishna, the narrator of the Bhagavad Gita, here implies Mam upetya tu kunteya punar janmana vidyate. That when that eternal soul finds its loving relationship in its eternal divine source, then it will feel so nourished that it will go back into that eternal environment and be there happy. Right? Sounds pretty nice. So going off the idea that consciousness is a distinct aspect of reality, inherently different than the material elements of this world, it would make sense that if we were to go to source points, seeing that everything has its source, if we go to original source, it would make sense that that source also has this aspect of reality, consciousness. And so then, from that deduction, what do we call an eternal, conscious source of all reality? Many different traditions and paths have many different names for that. Here we like to call that conscious source Krishna, which simply means the all-attractive one, meaning that they are the source of everything. Right? So, leaves us with one question. Now, if we deduce that fish belong in water, I'm sure I'm going to get a Nobel Prize for that one. That's a great discovery. that humans belong in living communities, loving communities, and that the soul belongs in a spiritual environment, and we understand that developing a relationship with the source, conscious source of all reality, helps us go to that place. Now what? What do we do while we're here in this world? How do we find that spiritual environment while we are living in a material world? Bhakti Center. Okay. This talk was brought to you by Bhakti Center.
That's cheating.
It is. So, in Conception, we have places like the Bhakti Center, where loving exchanges, where the spiritual principles, where these ideas are in conception, at the center of all of our dealings, at the center of all our activities, center of all our beings. And here, when we come together, we talk about spiritual things, we sing spiritual songs, we gather in community and share our hearts in this way. It develops that spiritual environment. And we can relish, like a fish out of water, if they're put in the river, they still feel the same nourishment as if they were in the ocean. And by following the stream of that river, they wind up at the ocean. So like this, when we are in spiritual communities, we can feel that same nourishment while we're in this world, and it gradually brings us on to that spiritual environment. So in principle, how do we find that? We find that in spiritual community. And so although I did put a nice advertisement slide of Bhakti Center, not meant to be an advertisement, but Bhakti Center is not the only spiritual community. It's imperative, though, that we do find a spiritual community where we do feel seen, where we do feel heard, we do feel received, and we can exchange our heart, exchange these principles that are most important to us, and we can receive that encouragement, receive that guidance, and that opportunity for growth. Because in those experiences, in those environments, we naturally feel that sustenance of the soul, that sustenance of the soul. So places like Bhakti Center are meant to be like that, and it is the ongoing experiment of how we can come together and we can try to create that environment. It is a work in progress. We're all practicing that. I can speak for myself. I'm not an expert in being a part of or being a spiritual person in all circumstances, but it's so nice that we can have a place where we can try. And so, in summary, we've discovered that fish belong in water, humans belong in loving communities, the soul belongs in a spiritual environment, and we can find that spiritual environment in spiritual community. Yeah. This talk was brought to you by Bhakti Center. Bhakti Center, where love is at the center. So our takeaway for today is that we as souls belong in spiritual community, where that love is at the center. Okay, that's where I probably should put the advertisement. Bhakti Center, okay. So we actually belong. So I hope if we can take away anything from today is that we naturally feel that nourishment. Just like a fish in water feels that nourishment, that sustenance. We feel that belonging in spiritual community. Not just any community, where one has a love in the center, and a spiritual community where love is at the center. And I appreciate you all for coming to this center, where Bhakti means love, and it is an ongoing experiment where we can go about sharing that with each other. So with that, I'll end today, and I thank you very much. And if there are any questions or comments, I would love to receive them and to try my little best to reciprocate with you all. So thank you very much. So are there any questions? Oh, yes.
Yeah, I have a question. So you were talking about how a
friend or like in a relationship, there's the possibility of someone making you grow, like helping you grow and pushing you to become your best version. How does that work if the foundation is love versus like criticism or whatever else you were describing?
One will last and one will not. One will last and one will not. I've seen this at least personally. When I've had mentors who have like corrected me from something that I did wrong, I found like, perhaps I'm just a kind of sensitive individual, but I found that I have just like a different feeling when it comes from a place of love or when it comes from a place of ego. You know? When it's a place of ego, there's like a hurt that becomes very discouraging. You know? And it's not, a blanket statement for all situations and scenarios, but in my limited experience, I found that where there is that ego, it's very discouraging, and it actually repels. You actually don't feel it. I mean, we're actually very intuitive beings. We can sometimes feel when we're being received and appreciated or corrected for our best interests, and sometimes when we're not. And so when we're not, we naturally feel repelled from that place. Like, oh, I don't feel a sense of belonging here, or, I'm not appreciated. That can either come very abruptly, or that can be over time, just drifting, that no one's checking in on us, no one like really cares to follow up with us. But as far as corrections, it can be really difficult, yeah, because so often it can come from that place of ego. Like, oh, I'm superior, you're, inferior, so I'm in a position to correct you, and you need to do like this, you have to respect my authority. And things like this can be very much repelling. It's not from a place of love. And the heart is naturally inclined towards love and repelled by things where there isn't love. So we'll see that even in our own reaction to how we receive that, right? But when it comes from a place of love, it still may not always be palatable. It still may not always be palatable, still might be a blow to our own ego. But at least when I remember one time distinctly being corrected, it was like during COVID, and I didn't wear my mask, and there was a whole lockdown in Florida, and the mentor was just like, come on, like, what are you doing? Like, you were risking the whole operation here. Like, you know better than this. My ego definitely got tweaked, so I was just like, come on, why are you correcting me? Come on, relax. But I was able to really see, like, this is the higher principle. Like, they're setting example for me. They're expecting more from me because they know that potential is within me. And I think about that now with so much love. Actually, I feel that affection, appreciation flowing from my heart, that they cared enough to correct me. They cared enough to correct me. Because it's easy to just, oh, how are you doing? Oh, that's nice. Okay, see you later. It's nice, and that's also good. But somebody cares enough to really spend that time, connect with you, get to know you as a person, see your potential, and call you out on it when you could be doing better, So when it really comes from a place of love, we feel that, and sometimes we just have to kind of experience kind of the variety that is present. And also I've noticed when it comes from a place of love, we can also have that conversation. Say that like a mentor said something and I felt bad about it, I can go to them, and say, respectfully, like what you mentioned and how you said it made me feel bad. It made me feel bad. Just like that, simple as it is. And if they're really coming from a place of love and they're very much, you could say, emotionally or spiritually evolved or developed, they can receive that because their intention is not to make you feel bad. The intention is to uplift you. And so they'll feel like, oh, that wasn't my intention. So that further dialogue really shows and reveals that their heart is in the right place. And from that, we can always kind of have like a bit of buffer for other people to make mistakes. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says every endeavor is covered by some fault, just like fire is covered by smoke. And so we can understand that sometimes the way something is expressed, the words that you may have used, or the time and circumstance may have been in such a way where it rubbed us the wrong way. But if we have that bit of buffer, we can understand, like, okay, everybody makes mistakes. There's some song that says, everybody makes mistakes, everybody has those days. I don't know the author of that, but it's like that, you know. And so we can offer that grace to others and also save that grace for ourselves when we make mistakes, especially in relationships. So those are a few thoughts on that. Hopefully that's satisfactory. Okay, thank you. Ashish?
Just extending on that, like, so ego can come from both sides.
Yeah.
So when I'm receiving, I could have an ego. Who knows, like, which ego is bad? Like the mentor or the receiver, like, how is it deciding, you know?
Good question. Interesting question. Yeah, I'll kind of throw another wrench in there. It can be good and bad are relative, right? According to perception. It arises from sense perception, perceiving something as good or bad. So now I'm going to make it super ethereal. We may not say that ego is inherently bad, but we can observe the results of false ego, like specifically false pride. Right? If I'm thinking I'm a very great scholar, and then there's a new student, I may be impelled to feel superior to them and treat them as less. And the result is that they don't feel loved, they feel repelled from that. And what to speak of if there's another great scholar and they're actually a better scholar than me and my ego is tweaked, the result of that is that maybe I become envious or want to undercut them or something like that. It becomes like a competition, and then we lose the purpose of the work itself. It just becomes a battle of who's better and who's worse, right? So we may not say that ego is inherently bad, but we can see the results. And so in the case that you're mentioning, where there may be a bit of ego on both sides of the party, then that's another perk of at least spiritual communities. I've heard one of my mentors from Florida, they mentioned when we all come together in a spiritual container, it's almost like a rock polisher. You ever seen those, like have jagged edges and you fit them in a container and stir them around? They actually, crash against each other. But those crashings make each other smoother. So the result is that they come out smooth. But that process of getting to that smooth place can look like sometimes, healthy conflict, where there's a misunderstanding and like we said, we have some dialogue about it and we resolve it. So when there's ego on both ends, which naturally there will be, as long as we have that culture of love, that culture of respect, then allows us to come back into that space and resolve it through dialogue. Yeah. But there will be ego on both sides naturally, to greater or lesser extents. And it requires the sincerity of the individual and the community to really process and go through that. Okay, thank you. Yes, Prabhu.
I heard that, let's say, a discrepancy of consciousness. A spiritual teacher in search of community, and a devotee striving to get better his consciousness. So in this relationship, how the spiritual teacher sees beyond, he sees acts of disharmony that will make this devotee struggle. So sometimes this spiritual master has to arrive to a wisdom in discernment to give instructions and polish up his actions. But I heard that such an act should be done as if you are taking homeopathy. You have to take in small dosages. Because if you overdo, it collapses, it crashes, it goes into shock, and the person cannot handle so much truth at once. So the wisdom has to know what moment to small dosage, it grows in a set. It grows in a set. But if you dump it out at once, it's too much.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. So many examples are just flooding through my mind. But I'll start with chapter 4, text 34. Tad vidi pranipadena, pari prashnena sevaya, upatik shantite ganam gyaninas tattva darshana. That whenever we have these kind of inquisitive minds, it's imperative that we take the guidance of that teacher. Like you mentioned, there's the student who's wanting to become more spiritually awakened, spiritually developed, and receive this transcendental knowledge. And there's that teacher who has it, tattva darshani, because they have seen the truth. They have already arrived at that place which we want to develop towards, right? So like this, tattva darshana, it requires even more of the delicate hand of that teacher to know what the student can handle, how much, and at what time. That's a very delicate operation. It can be a very delicate operation. Because like you mentioned, if it's too much all at once, it will kind of overload the system, you know, just seeing like too much of the truth all at once. Okay, here's one example that relates. Has anyone seen The Matrix? Yeah? Okay. There's that moment where Neo is first being taken out of the Matrix, and Morpheus, who's playing like the role of the spiritual teacher, is like, you know, everything is an illusion. And he's like, whoa, that's way too much. You know, get me out of here. And he needs to get out of the system and like, you know, clear his stomach system also. So like this, too much too soon can overload us, right? So it's a delicate operation of knowing like how much the student can handle at what level to really bring us up to that level. Which is why it's imperative that we seek the shelter, we seek the guidance of those spiritual teachers who have arrived at that level and are expert in guiding us. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on like what healthy love is versus being manipulated, you know, to something that
Yes, definitely. Okay, so healthy love as opposed to being manipulated, right? I think of the example of the mother, you know, when you have like a loving mother and you have like this new baby, right? The mother is just only solely giving for the benefit of the child without expecting anything in return. This is actually a higher, you know, definition of love, you know. This topic can be a little muddy because we use that term love so liberally, you know, to describe so many different things. You know, we're talking about I love you for the rest of my life. To I also love this dress at the boutique. You know, it's like, okay, well, those are very different things. You know, so but we use that to describe the similar things. But what is love really? It's beyond just like a feeling of affection or a liking of something, appreciation of something. It's, you know, that thing which is beyond words, which drives us, you know, that thing where we would give anything for, we would sacrifice for them, right? Which is where love finds its highest expression in relationships beyond people, between souls, right? Because if it's love on a relative level, then it's like, I love you today and I hate you tomorrow. But if it's in the spiritual platform, then that love also takes on that quality of eternality, and that means it's unconditional. And unconditional it sounds like a really sweet term, you know, it's unconditional love. Wow, you know, nice. Get your unconditional love at Target today. Sorry, I'm like in advertisement mode today. I don't know why. Probably walking down New York streets too often. So it sounds really nice, but what are the ramifications of that word unconditional? If there's 10 feet of snow outside, and you need medicine from the store, unconditional. I'm going to find some way to get it to you. Whether I am always getting what I want, I'm still there loving you, right? Without condition, which can be really difficult in this world because we live in a world where there are conditions. And in order to have healthy, loving relationships, sometimes we have to have conditional boundaries or limitations. And when those boundaries are transgressed, love can be expressed in a higher way by taking distance. By taking distance. I always find this to be a really crucial point because allowing someone to degrade themselves by mistreating us is not an action of our loving them. Love is not always as easy to execute. Love doesn't always mean that the object of our love will be pleased with us. For example, the mother. When the mother tells the child, it's time to go to bed, no, I want to stay up, I want to watch, whatever. I can't think of these things so fast anymore. Racer X, I don't know. I don't think that's a TV show anymore, or at all. But he wants to stay up, he wants to watch TV. But the parent knows the child needs to go to sleep so he can get rest, and it'll be better for him long term. The child's not going to be happy about that. The child says, I want to have this ice cream. No, that's not good for you. You've had too much today. Why do you not love me? It's time to go to school. No, I don't want to go to school. I want to play. Go to school because it'll be better for you, right? And luckily, or hopefully, the children will grow up in hindsight, be very much appreciating that they challenged us in this way, that they did what was best for us, that they expressed affection for us in this way. Right? But to make the point that when we express that affection, it is not always going to make the object of our affection pleased with us in the immediate circumstance. And so in the matter of like intimate relationships, if they're transgressing our boundaries, then it's actually our responsibility to take distance, because we're not helping them by allowing them to drag us down also. And to summarize that with an example, in lifeguard training, some of you may have heard me say this before. You're like, yeah. You're like, this is your go-to. I am a certified lifeguard, by the way. So in training, they actually tell us, and I was so surprised. Our lifeguard instructor said, if you find yourself in a circumstance where the person that you're trying to save, or in this case, the person that you're trying to love, is also going to drag you down, they're so much in a panic where they grab onto you and hold you, and it is in such a way where you're also going to drown, it is your responsibility, not just a choice, it's your responsibility to push them away, distance yourself, and make sure you're going to maintain your own life. Now, why might that be? We can actually see that if they're going to lose their life, then we've actually added another life to their, karmic debt, so to say. Because now they haven't totally lost their own life, but they've taken another life with them, right? So love in that case means taking distance. But here's the flip to that. Because it's not just close the door, block you on all social medias, never talk to you again. Sorry, maybe that was too real. Sorry, I'm like so out of touch these days. Okay, what should I say? But, it may not exactly manifest like that. If it needs to, for sure, do that. But it's not just that the door is closed. In the lifeguard training, it says, yes, we take the distance, but as soon as that person reaches the bottom of the pool, has lost consciousness, and thus is no longer a threat to themselves or others, Immediately. You dive in, grab them, bring them to the surface, and resuscitate them. And if we do like that, then we actually save that person's life. If we are attached to doing it in the immediate, then sometimes that results in both of us going down. But now, if we do it in this proper way, this logical way, then the result is that both lives are saved, which was the intention. So sometimes love will manifest like that we have to take the distance, but when they're ready to respect our boundaries, our needs in this world, then if it's healthy and supportive to our well-being, we can extend that love to them in whatever way that fits in that circumstance. So that was more than a few thoughts on that, but in summary, it's unhealthy when it transgresses our boundaries beyond necessity, and it's healthy when it's mutually uplifting to both parties. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Can I chip in?
Sure.
Tiny. I work with energy, so I'm extremely sensitive to energy. So I have a full grasp of the difference. I'm going to give an analogy of coffee drinking and green tea drinking. Coffee compresses us. If you drink 3 cups of coffee, the compression in the chest might create anxiety and jittery. So uncomfortable. It's like a jacket force, energetic. Coffee does that. Green tea is highly the opposite. It creates elation in the heart chakra, expansion and lightness. So everything that provokes this elation is highly beneficial. It's highly connected with love. Anything that compresses you in the chest. So to receive an advice or counseling from somebody and check in your chest. How do you feel? Is this compressing me? Is this expanding me, create elation? Then the true love will create elation and free you up to expand, feel free, feel joy.
Yes. Thank you for that. Shipalan?
Yeah, so just building on what's been offered here, you brought us to the point of finding belonging in a spiritual community. I'm wondering if you could tell us, you gave Bhakti Center as an example, but can you tell us some of the characteristics of such a spiritual community or such spiritual communities?
Some of the aspects.
What are we looking for in that spiritual community? What?
Checklist.
How's it indicated?
You want me to be honest?
I have one thing. We're
Yeah.
looking for people that really know their deficiencies, whatever they may be, and they want to work on improving themselves. So we may all be here with our own life trajectories, but we all, every single one of us has places that we can work on and improve. And if we're trying to be part of a community, by improving ourselves, we can better contribute to that community.
Nice. Excellent. Yes. That's an excellent description. Yeah, shout out to that. Yeah, very nice. Yeah. Thank you, Magma. She's an excellent student. So like that, you know, because it can be difficult when we bring all the expectations that this community should already have everything perfect, you know. It's like we're coming together in that place with the intention of working together to develop that within our hearts. And so to give a few more aspects, you know, it would look as being seen, you know. We come in the door, people are happy that we're there, they're happy to see us. We feel, you know, like we had mentioned, a sense of belonging, that they appreciate us, that we're in the proper situation, according to Merriam-Webster. That we're appreciated, you know. where the different things that we may offer or the different aspects of ourselves are seen and appreciated. What else?
Feeling safe.
Feeling
I
safe.
come to you and it doesn't matter if you have a mistake, whatever, you're gonna see that no matter what.
Yes.
Same nutrition.
Yes.
Smile, like the face. I can go into
Yes.
and it's not gonna judge me or punish me.
Oh my gosh. I want you guys to be giving soul talks next. It's nice. Exactly that. You know, where it's coming from a place of love, it's challenging, but it's in an encouraging way, not in a way that breaks us down. Right? That they see us. And that we can trust them. That it's safe. Right? Like you had mentioned, there's a verse in Nectar of Instruction, Sad Vidhi Priti Lakshanam, that there are 6 loving exchanges between one person and another, which involve offering of food, which we'll have soon enough, so that's our loving exchange. Receiving of food, offering of gifts, receiving of gifts, and arguably one of the most potent, the sharing of one's mind and receiving of one's mind in confidence. What does confidence mean? Confidence means that when I tell you something that I'm going through, I will not find it on Facebook tomorrow, right? I'm not going to find that it's been postured all over everywhere, you know? That it's safe, that I can trust, that I can actually reveal what's going on in my heart and not receive shame as a result. Shame is one of the biggest, you know, for lack of better terms, degrading aspects of spiritual communities, especially when it becomes from material ego that, oh, I've done this for such and such amount of time, so I'm better, and you have to do like this, and if you can't come to the same standard, then, you know, if it goes in that direction, it doesn't become spiritual anymore. It just becomes a material community in the name of spiritual pursuits. I probably shouldn't be saying this so directly, but yeah, this is a question. So when we all come with that sincerity and we find those places, right? If we have that sincerity in our hearts, that guide, the Paramatma, the guide in the hearts will bring us to those communities or those people within the communities who will be able to receive us in that aspect and encourage us and fan the spark of our spiritual, ambition, like that. And it'll help us grow, it'll help us awaken, and help us share that with others. I mean, I can feel from my own experience that being in such a saturated community, like the one in Krishna House in Florida, it allowed me then to turn around and share that with others because I had been so much received. My heart had been so much filled with love that now all I have to share is that love. Now I'm not going to say all love is going to be all of what comes out from me, but to give that example, right? That when we fill our hearts with love, gradually that becomes all that we have to offer to others. So, yes.
I have a question on the topic of belonging,
Yes.
spiritual and material. 'Cause I think a lot of us in here would have experienced both lives and are in search for some form of integration. I would say the last 15 years I've been pretty spiritual. Prior to that, spirit was an alcohol, right? And I was more material driven. I'd say in my material life or my spiritual blended life, I have experienced deep joy and satisfaction, and also pain and suffering. And I have a lot of also friends or relatives or previous partners, etc., who have been purely material, never even tasted a drop of spirit, or they did and it's not for them. And also people that are way more spiritual than I think I'll ever be in this life. Both of them have also, both types have also experienced immense joy and also suffering. So, I guess my question is just in this life, are we all meant to just live our own lives versus there being spirituality as the best way or material as a bad way, or just, is it very relative and subjective, or is there some ultimate understanding that you can share?
Thank you for this question. It's really crucial, actually, in life in general. And I'll close with this one story to illustrate this point. Machaspashastu kuntaya, shitoshna sugatogada, agamapainoditas tamstatikswasabharataha, that happiness and distress will come into our lives and also leave our lives, just like the changing of the summer and the winter seasons. They arise from sense perception, and one must learn to tolerate them without becoming disturbed. This is what Krishna says in the second chapter, text 14. And now I thought that was so interesting. Okay, so I'll be happy sometimes, sad sometimes, but I had to figure out how to tolerate that. How? Krishna later says by connecting spiritually, that sustenance, that nourishment will give us that foundation despite the externals. But then I was thinking, okay, how do you really apply that? Like, what's an example? Like, who has exhibited this? And so the story is that I had a friend, again from Krishna House, I'm mentioning them a lot today. They were a community member, I think their name is Amrita Kili. And they one day found out that they had stage 4 cancer. And they're like mid-30s, 2 kids, you know, not more than 2, 3, 4 years old. Whole life ahead of him, and all of a sudden now he's getting news that he might not have 6 months left to live, you know, right? So that can be like a very scary situation, right? Because it's like, okay, what am I gonna do? Who's gonna take care of my family? I have so many responsibilities, you know, what's going to happen? Right? And he was telling us in a morning class one day that he went for his chemo treatment. And in the treatment, there were so many different people, and many were so scared, so terrified. Like even being brought into the room, people were like screaming or crying and things like this. Like very heavy, you know, very heavy. But unlike other people, he was actually very peaceful. He's very calm. Now it's so interesting because he's in the same circumstance, maybe even worse, because he has so much of his life, you know, ahead of him, you know, as we think, right? But he explained to us that his realization from his spiritual practice was that it gave that shelter. Tamastatikswasabharataha. Tolerating doesn't mean just like bearing and gritting down. It's finding a refuge. It's finding a shelter. Finding they whom we can confide in every circumstance of life. Okay? And so spiritual life brings us that aspect. It develops that connection with our source, our conscious source, who, Sarvashachaham Hiri Sandivisto, is in our own heart, is present with us. And he realized that through cultivating that, through his knowledge, his study, and his practical daily practices, that relationship developed. Just like when you come to meet someone, you develop a relationship by interacting with them. And so his relationship developed to such an extent where he can be in the scariest of situations, and he has full trust. My friend, Krishna, Supreme Person, he's Bhoktaram Yagatapasa Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. He will take care. In fact, I'm just an instrument of his grace to my family members and to my community. And so that mood of him just saying like, okay, I'm just an instrument. I don't have to be in control. It doesn't have to all solely depend on me. It gave him so much relief that even in those scariest circumstances, he was completely peaceful. And luckily the story goes on that his cancer went into remission, and so now he's living happily with his family. So the story ends happy also on that end. But like this, we can see that developing that spiritual practice can give us those most intimate of connection, which we can actually share with Krishna in the good times and the bad times. Like we might have a friend where it's like we've been through thick and thin, and how close that actually brings us. And so because if we develop that relationship, everything becomes, I don't want to say ammunition,
Beautiful. Like
becomes beautiful. It becomes a reason, an incentive to celebrate, a reason to connect. It becomes a medium for connection. Oh, something good happened. Krishna, this was so nice. Oh, I'm really going through something difficult. I'm sharing my heart with you, Krishna. I'm going through some difficulty. And if we practically experience what that's like, then we can transcend all other things. So hopefully that's a few words on that. Hopefully that's good enough. Thank you so much. Hey.